So, welcome to this evening. We have a very special event, a conversation with award-winning author Sandra Birdsell. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aileen Friesen, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of History here at the University of Winnipeg and co-director of the Center for Transnational Mennonite Studies, or CTMS, along with my colleague, Dr. Ben Nobbs-Thiessen, and CTMS is the host of this conference. CTMS and the University of Winnipeg acknowledge that we live and work in the ancestral and traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Anishinaabe, the Assiniboine, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Red River Métis nations. We also acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. These lands and this water sustain us, and we give our gratitude to the First Nations that protected these resources. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Sarah Ens, this evening's moderator. When I was putting together this conference program, I sent out an email to a few people asking advice about who should moderate this prestigious event with Sandra. And I'm not sure why I sent out that email, because I always knew I was going to ask Sarah, whose poetry is both delicate and determined, lyrical and historically sensitive. She was the perfect person to lead this conversation. Sarah is a writer and editor based in Treaty 1 territory. She is the author of 2 books of poetry published by Turnstone Press, and both shortlisted for the McNally Robinson Book of the Year Award. The World is Mostly Sky, her debut collection, was also nominated for the Lansdowne Prize for Poetry, and Flyway, her long poem, was a nominee for the Manitoba Historical Society's Margaret McWilliams Award. She's just an amazing poet and author, and so please welcome Sarah, who will host this evening.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Aileen, for inviting me to have this conversation with Sandra, who is an author whose work I have held, that I hold very dear. Oop, there goes the microphone. And whose work I admire very much. Oh, thank you. So I will be having a conversation here very shortly with Sandra, but before that, I'm going to introduce her, although I am sure many of you know her excellent body of work very well. Sandra Birdsell is the author of 6 novels, 3 short story collections, and a number of scripts for TV, theater, and radio, as well as a children's book. Her writing has won many prestigious awards, including the Gerald Lampert Award, McNally Robinson Book of the Year Award, the Saskatchewan Book of the Year Award 2 times, the Saskatchewan Book Award for Fiction 3 times. 3 of her books have been a finalist for the Governor General's Award, and of course, the Russlander was nominated for the Giller as well. She's been awarded the Cheryl and Henry Kloppenberg Award for Literary Excellence. She has been appointed a member of the Order of Canada, and she is a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, among many other wonderful recognitions. So I'm very, very pleased to have this conversation. We'll chat, just the 2 of us briefly, and you can listen in. And then we're going to open the conversation to you, so you can hold on to your burning questions, and you'll have a chance to ask Sandra in the second half of this hour. So, Sandra, I wanted to open our conversation by asking why you wanted to write about the Russlander experience. What were you hoping to explore, or understand, or even challenge about the Russlander narrative?
Well, is this on? Good. Well, actually, I didn't want to write about the Russlanders. I put it off as long as I possibly could. I knew it was a story that had to be told, but I had quite a few stories of my own I wanted to tell first. And besides that, I think I was learning how to write and learning how to read. And I started to get interested in the subject and visiting museums, buying books, and before I knew it, my office was just towers of research material because I knew absolutely nothing about Mennonites, although my mother was a Mennonite. And I would ask her, well, what kind of Mennonite are you? And she would say, well, first Mennonite. And I'd say to her, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And she said, it means we were first. And that's all I knew about her. I didn't have a very, I wasn't attracted to Mennonites, I'll just put it that way. In one of my short stories, and I shouldn't say it, well, I will say it. One of my short stories, one of my characters says that she didn't want to associate with Mennonites or be seen as a Mennonites because being Mennonite was like having acne. It was dull and boring. And no one would invite you out. And it was like God was listening. And he said, do you think that? Anyway, that's my imagination speaking. I didn't hear God's voice. I obviously did. But I was just curious to know, and because my aunties, they're my opa and his two sisters and the very old great-grandmother came during that time, during the time and a whole batch came, and the Russlanders came. Where was I? No. I thought that they were too somber and morose, and I had an great auntie who needed to have someone with her at nighttime, and I would have been 13 or 14 years old, and she asked if I would come and sleep with her and stay with her for nights. And I had no idea why, except that some time ago she had lost her husband, so she was alone. And I went, because her house was close to the skating rink. And it was really easy just to, hang my skates on my shoulder and go over to her house. And I would crawl in bed with her, and she had these feather ticks. And later on, of course, I'd read what happened to most of the feather ticks, how they were cut open and thrown from windows and scattered through the streets in Russia or Ukraine. And those feather ticks were just like, you climb on them and you lie on them, and then all of a sudden you go shh, all the way down. And she was heavier than I, so somehow I thought I was going to suffocate because I was so close to her, and she would cry and she would mutter and she would pray aloud. And I didn't know why. And so I revolted and said I rebelled, that I didn't want to do that anymore. And my father said, no, I didn't have to. So he said, I will come and I will sit with her in her house until she goes into bed and she falls asleep. And he did. And I don't know how long he did that, but he did. And I think that was amazing because, my father's not Mennonite. And, but he showed a generosity that I seldom saw in some Mennonites. Sorry, true. So that was my first contact with Mennonites. Of course, my Opa and Oma were just wonderful people. They had a garden on a hill in Morris, Manitoba, and it went down into the river. And my grandpa started his greenhouses, and he was growing gardens, and he showed me how to plant gardens. And he had blue eyes that were so pale blue. They were just beautiful blue eyes. And he didn't speak English very well, but he didn't have to, because we weren't really talking. We were doing things together, doing things in the garden. And that was a treasure, because I was the fifth of 11 children at home, and my parents didn't have a lot of time for me, because there were twins were born just after me, and the person on the other side of me died of leukemia when she was 70 years old, and that was a terrible time for my parents, and it took them a while to come out of that. But I think that that really affected my life a lot, really did. I just couldn't measure up to that sister who was gone, because I was kind of reckless and rowdy, and I got into trouble, and I just thought, I would have to die to be good or something. So I just didn't have a good opinion. Tante Mika and Tante Anna and Mary, and then on my other side, on Saturday night, my dad would take out his fiddle, and we'd invite some of his friends in, and we'd have a little hoedown in the living room on the piano. Red River, I forget some of the jigs, the Red River jig he would play. And we would dance in our nightgowns. And my mother never objected to that. It was a very happy thing that we were doing. But to make a very long story short, I was a writer, and I was invited by Hildy Thiessen to Conrad Grebel College to do a reading, because some of my stories were having a few Mennonite characters in them. And Hildy spotted that, because she was really looking out for some Mennonite writers. And so I went, and she was just looking after her students, and I was waiting for my time to come. And there on a bookshelf, there was this book, and it was a book of photographs by the photographer who, Reimer, I think his name was, from the old colony, from Cochise Colony, Rosenthal, or wherever it was. And he's famous. And there on the cover are my two aunts with 2 or 3 other women. And they're beautiful. They're wearing beautiful dresses, white dresses, and crochet collars, and their hair is beautiful. And they're just not who I knew them to be. And so I went through the book, and there's my mom. She's sitting on a pillar, and she's like a baby, and there's a hand in the picture. You can't see the person, but they're holding her on the pillar so she doesn't roll off. And this book of photographs, there was the old oak tree. Now, if you're a Mennonite, you got to know about the old oak tree. There it was, and there my mom was with the other kids crawling in the branches. So I thought, okay, I'm interested. And so I did 2 trips. If my next question is, how did you prepare to write the Russlander? I did 2 trips to Ukraine. One with, it was a Mennonite heritage cruise. It was a boatload of Mennonites, because I just wanted to be the fly on the wall, and I wanted to hear how they talked and what they were hoping to see, etc. And the next one was really by myself and a friend, and we went, and we had an experience that some of my experiences that kind of taught me what my family must have gone through, in the sense that the villages were not full of Mennonites anymore. And we were walking down a street in Main Street in Koitetsa Village, and the fellows were having a wonderful time in the backyard, whooping it up. And I was traveling with a translator, and she was quite nervous about it. This 2 or 3 of them came roaring out of the yard over to me and wanted to know what was I doing. And I was drawing pictures of the houses. I was drawing how a typical kind of Mennonite house was built, with the gables and the shape of the roof and things like that. And this fellow got interested. And all of a sudden, they were going to charge us to walk down the street. That's what they wanted. They wanted money because so many Mennonites now were coming to see their places. They wanted something for it. And we didn't pay them any money, but my interpreter, or translator, was frightened. And I looked at these fellows and I thought, hey, this is probably what people had to deal with. And no wonder they were terrified. And then I realized that Machno, who was a local thug in those villages, actually stayed in my grandparents' house for quite some time, maybe 2 weeks or something. And the rest of the family had one room, and these were the aunts too, because my Opa's sisters, they were. And so, you gotta wonder what happened and the stories they didn't tell. And that's what made me curious, because I wanted to find out what went on there, what happened. And I did. And I wanted to tell a story because I felt I owed it to them. So now you can go home.
Well, one of the things that really blew me away when I read the Russlander was how vivid it is in its detail, and how I don't think I had ever read anything quite like that, where I felt like now I understand what a Mennonite estate would have looked like, and I could really picture the plants that were all around and what the landscape looked like, and how the people would be interacting with each other. So I was just amazed with the amount of intricate detail, and I can only imagine you talk about piles of books in your study, and I can only imagine. You talk about these untold stories, and wanting to share that, and I'm curious about that. I wrote a book called Flyway about my Oma's story and her journey of migration from Ukraine to Manitoba after the Second World War. And I wrote it because I was trying similarly to understand that experience and to try to know the full story and make sense of it. But I was also very aware that I couldn't help but bring my own context and my own set of concerns to this story and narrate it in a way that made sense to me. And when I was rereading the Russlander, the interviewer in the novel, sort of the framing device of the book, I think his name is Ernest Unger.
Unger.
Yeah, and he's recording all these testimonies of Russlander women, and at some point, Katja says, "What do you hope to get from my story?" And I thought about that a lot, about this work of hearing stories or trying to retell experiences that weren't your own, but you've inherited in some way. And I was wondering about your process as you were working on the novel, with thinking through some of that.
It was curiosity, I have to say, and it was just wanting to know. It was curiosity. I looked up that. Oh, excuse me. I looked up that page where he says, "What do you hope to get?" Right, and I mean, I could ask all of you, I mean, what do you hope to get, from reading the history of the Russlander? Like, what do we hope to get reading or from our parents' background and their life experiences? What makes us curious about it? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why we might do that. But mine was really, they were so damn secretive. They would not talk. All they would say is, where we lived was very beautiful. It's much more beautiful than it is here. Our watermelons were bigger. This is what my Opa fumed over. He could not grow a proper watermelon in Manitoba, right? And that's all I got out of them. And then when you go back and you read exactly, and I wrote down some of the things that happened, but I'm not going to read them because they're just terrible. But when you read what happened, you think, how did they manage, these people, to come and leave everything behind? I know my grandparents buried a baby almost the day they left. And how did they manage to come to southern Manitoba and other places, but this is not what I'm familiar with, and do so well? What is it? And I mean, I went to Mennonite churches for a while to try and figure it out. I cooked Mennonite food. I became friends with Sandra, don't forget his name, Rudy Weeb. Very early sought him out. I think he was a writer in residence here at this university, I think. And he was very generous, actually. And he doesn't like me saying this, but he once said to me, you're the perfect person to write the story because you have one foot in and one foot out. And possibly that's true. I can be a little bit more distant than not, but I got quite emotional about, in the end, what I was reading and discovering. And the way I write is I write from the inside out, like I have to get to know the people that I'm writing about very, very well. And that's why I cooked the food. I went to church. I visited all the museums. I went to the Steinbach Museum. I wanted to ask them if I could please sleep there overnight. And they wouldn't let me in one of the beds. And I wanted to know what it felt like, But I think that if I was an editor, and you mentioned all the wonderful details, I would cut a lot of them out. I think it's overloaded with. I name just about every name of a cookie and cake and thing food you could cook and giving it its proper name. And I'm thinking, this is, if I was an editor, I say, we don't actually need that, But I was so determined to get it, not insult anybody, and to get it right, because I felt that I owed the story utmost respect because of what I was writing about. Not that you don't respect everything you write, but this in particular. And so I overdid it a little bit. But I forgot where this was going, but then, that's not, since I turned 80, that seems to be happening a little bit.
Well, you made a comment about writing from the inside
Yes,
out.
yes.
And that's another thing I love about your writing is these characters in this novel, but in all of your work, they come from different contexts, different, economics, and they have different experiences, but you really feel that everyone is a human in it. It feels very, like you have a lot of compassion and love, it feels like, towards the cast of characters, which is, was something I really appreciate about this book. We're at 7:30. I have one more question that I can ask you now, and then we can open it up.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, great. So the question I have left is, looking back, it's been 2 decades now since the book has been out in the world, and I'm curious about what you think of the story now and its impact on people, and how you reflect on the 2 decades of it being out there.
Well, I think this was my 8th. No, it wasn't my 8th book, but I just reread it again, and I think I was very moved in the end by the story. I just didn't know how. Well, when I was on the trip, I wondered, how can people have compassion and for the enemy? Because it obvious was there. I was seeing it and hearing it. Once the boat docked and then we got off the ship, I shouldn't say the boat, and we were just walking around, and there were these 2 sailors who were leaning up against the fence and just waiting, I guess, until we all got together and got back on board. And they spoke English, and one of them said, "Who are these people?" And the other one said, we used to kill them. Yes, he did. And then he went on and said something else, and I said, "Oh yeah, all right, it's okay. Canes are new to me." That's what's, I guess, the little bit that he learned about the history. I guess he may not have known a lot, but I was left with deep admiration for my mother's people. And I just wish that all I knew about Mennonites when I was living as a Mennonite with a Mennonite mother was that I shouldn't go to movies, I shouldn't dance, I shouldn't wear too many cosmetics. It was a list of things that I should not do. And all I thought was, this is terrible. I mean, this is a restrictive, horrible place to be. I mean, I was growing up in the 58, 59, 60, and things were just getting a little wilder, starting to at that point. And I just wondered, like, how do you do that? I mean, she lived right there with those guys in the house. And afterwards, when you read the statistics for the kinds of things that went on, in the village where my mother lived with her aunts, there was a high amount of rape, a high amount. And so you wonder what quietness in these people, and so many of them needing mental health care once they came here, and yet they've prospered. You only have to go driving around in southern Manitoba to see that. They've prospered, and that has been the case almost wherever they've gone, which is part of the reason why they wound up in Ukraine in the first place, is because they actually displaced the Cossacks of their homeland, and they were given the land because they prospered, and they prospered too much that they couldn't provide for the, as their people grew, they couldn't provide for everybody, so they had to move on. But I think it was, then 7/11 happened, the book was published, 7/11? 9/11? The book was published on 9/11, and that's what it says in the book. And all I know is that afterwards, no one was interested in reading it, and obviously you can understand why. And so my editor at that time and I sat down to try and figure out how I could make some kind of connection between what happened with the towers and what happened to the Mennonites. And all I could think of is the response is not going to be the same. It can't be, because the United States is such a big, powerful country. But even the ordinary person, the response could not possibly be the same. And so I still haven't got the answer, but I'll tell you, I'm not writing anything more about Mennonites. I'm writing my memoirs. Thank you. Have you got a question?
I think we can open it up. I think there will be eager people. And I believe there are folks with microphones who are ready to be deployed at this time. So if you have a question for Sandra, you can put your hand up high, and I think, yes, and then someone will come to you with a microphone.
Hi, Sandra. My name is Pat, and I want to hit on a little bit of what Sarah said, but your character development was just amazing. And when I got to the spot, the very first of the book, where Justina and Greta braided their hair together,
Yes.
I was hooked.
Yes.
And it was like I couldn't put it down the whole rest of the time. So just such graphic detail and such funny little things. But my question for you is the baby Anne vote. Who do you want us to think hid her in Abram Suderman's office?
I didn't get the last part of it.
Who do you want us to think hid baby Anne vote in
In the
Abram
house.
Suderman's office?
In the big house, and
Yes.
she survived.
Yes, she survived. Was it Vera?
Yes.
It was Vera.
Yes.
There we have it.
Yes.
Hi. I was reading your story, and I was thinking about how different our understanding of colonialism has become in the last 10 years, and the fact that we're celebrating 100 years since then, and they were there for maybe 100 years, and just thinking about the colony and our own working through colonization. What do you think about how that reflects on the novel now?
I didn't hear the last part.
What do you think about the novel's relation to colonialism now?
The novel's relationship to colonialism now.
Pardon?
How does the novel, how do you think that the novel relates to colonialism now?
You know what? That's not something that I've really thought about. Now, I suppose if you did some digging. No, I can't answer that one. I don't know. I know it's a big topic right now, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. My name is Dora Dewick, and this is a question I actually wanted to ask this morning, but it's for you as well. I'm really gratified that a history conference is featuring 3 literary writers, and you talk about using history. You've got piles of books for your research, so history is serving you and you're using it. Why should historians then read literature? Like, what is literature giving back to the historical practice?
I can't answer that one neither, Dora.
Well, it relates to your question of what do you hope to get from my story?
What do you want to get from my story?
Well, I wonder if historians should read more literature.
I knew this was going to be asked, and I know. Okay, there's that part. I actually did some homework for this. Just what do you want to get to my story? And for me personally, to leave it behind finally. Because it's creeping in all of my work. And so I wanted to deal with it. And only when I'd finished did I understand that I was, okay, here we go. I was destined in some way to write this novel because it wouldn't leave me alone. That's what I think. And it was a horrendous task, I have to tell you, because I do live my stories. And that last scene where the families lose their lives, I don't know where I was at that time, but I had to every day go and swim in this wide pool that had a big window in it when you swim laps. And I'd look at the sky. And that's the only way I could go back to my desk for the next day, is to swim, purify, cleanse, swim, look at the sky. Because you can't write that stuff without it rubbing off on you and climbing inside you. And if you can, then you're not writing it right. No, that's not true. Just because that's my method doesn't mean it's the only method. There's many other writers have different ways of approaching their subjects and cutting themselves off so that they don't suffer illnesses. I was afraid that I might get sick. Yeah. Really, out of respect for people, for what the people had gone through, that was truth, had to be true, and it had to be accurate. And while at the same time, it had to hold the reader's attention. And I had to play it out with made-up or fictional characters, a true story. That was so difficult. Anyway, I had this argument with myself and with my mother several times. Is fiction, writing fiction, the same as lying? Are you telling lies? And I had a big struggle with myself when I started writing, because I wondered whether I was going to have to give up my membership in my church or something, because was I lying? And I'm not going to answer the question because I still want to write some more first. And also because all along the way, that was 7 years, 5 years, 2 years research, 5 years research writing, I felt as though there was this huge crowd of people behind me, looking over my shoulder to see if I was going to get it right. I had that feeling that I was being watched. And then the book came out, it was published, to a great silence. There was according to my reviews of my other books, I got lots of reviews. This not. No. And I was curious. In fact, I was a little frightened a bit because were Mennonites mad at me? Because I was looking for reviews, and I thought, well, you know, they're the kind of people, they wouldn't say it. They wouldn't tell me that. I would have to go and dig it out somewhere, because nobody would say, go and read this because, you know, I think you should know. No, it's big silence from you guys. And I was disappointed, of course, because it took so much of my life. I remember as I was writing it, I went out to a place in Saskatchewan where I would be all by myself. And at that time, my sister was killed in a car accident. And she was my best friend. And it was after that that my brother said to me, okay, so now you can probably go back and write that novel. And I realized that that experience taught me the nature and the color of grief. And that I didn't have one iota idea of what people suffered and how they felt personally. I was looking at the outside and not from the inside. So anyway, I mean, I'm getting upset thinking about it, to tell you the truth.
Well, when you talk about needing to, how painful the process of writing it was, and needing to go out and swim, you know, when I read the book, I felt like after almost, because you've set up the framing of the novel is so smart, because you open with that newspaper article, and so you know it's coming. And I felt like I had to go swim every paragraph that I was getting closer. And, you know, I was just so worried and so moved. And yeah, it's a really painful experience reading it too, but so important. And just to touch on these two questions that we've had, I think when I read it recently, I thought this is so very relevant now, this book, in the way that it depicts this history, in the way that it brings up themes and ideas around colonization and thinking through, you know, what does it mean for Mennonites to have created these settlements in these different places, and how their neighbors are interacting with each other. And yeah, I was blown away by how relevant this novel is now, and yeah, and really needing to swim a lot or go on walks or something, because it does this is the kind of novel that really does get under your skin. So I can only imagine that that writing it. But thank you for writing it. I think we have time for one more question if someone has one. Oh, there's one over there.
Hi, my name is Sherry Swatskidik, and this last year I've been on sabbatical. I work as a counseling therapist at Brandon University, and the project that I'm working on is generational trauma related to the Russlander mothers and daughters and granddaughters of the women who came from Russia in the 1920s. And in the middle of my research, I picked up this book. It was recommended by somebody, I don't even remember who, and to answer the question about historians and literature, it was really a very helpful book in the middle of my history. I did a history research first and then interviews of women, and I'm trying to kind of piece it together, and it's getting bigger and more complicated than I thought. But the book has been really helpful because it's brought up some themes for me that I'll need to delve into as I'm doing my research. The silence, for example, and in the book you mentioned something about the words that were used for sexual assault, or the lack of words that were used for sexual assault. And so there were lots of really interesting themes that you brought in the book that will really help me in the research that I'm doing and in the discussions I'm having with daughters and granddaughters as we sort of look at what impact this trauma has on the generations as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to have people here who can answer my questions for me.
And there's one. Here, I can hear.
Yeah, just a short comment on editing to this question about what historians could get from fiction literature. I think that actually fiction literature works with emotions when historians work with facts, and this is something that, I mean, we all need to work with our emotions, and so fiction literature can really help with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, there's one more final, or a few final thoughts?
There,
Yeah.
down there.
Okay, two final comments.
We'll take one from Zoom and then one,
Oh,
and then
great.
one from the room. So this is from Marlene. She says, "I'm sorry you did not receive more adequate response to this book that was incredibly powerful. When I read it, it knocked me out. There are so many more details to tell. Do you have any advice for writers and stories that might be told?"
There.
Oh, and so do you have any advice for writers who are working on these kinds of stories?
Well, I'm not a writer of historical fiction. That's a whole genre that I know nothing about. And really, it's true. I can't tell you what kind of fiction I do write either, so there you go. I think this person here did ask me a question. I know her very well.
Hi, Sandra. It was so great to hear you talking about the creation of this novel and what it cost you. And my question is, did the people in your family read it, and how did it change you, or how did it change the meaning of the heritage for your family?
In my family,
Or for you?
they don't read it. My family has, if they've read my books, they haven't talked about it. My mother said something to me once, and she said, "I've decided," okay, it sounds awful, but "I've decided I'm not going to read your books because I want to keep on loving you." Yeah.
It's not really funny, is it?
Yeah, but I'll tell you, she loved this one. She said she'd read it twice. And she said to me, "How did you know? How did you know it was like that?" And it was the biggest compliment I've ever received from her. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Sandra. I really, really appreciate it. I know everyone here really appreciates hearing you talk about working on this book, and we're so grateful the book exists. Let's give her a round of applause.
Can I just, you know what, I just have to read you one teeny weeny thing. I'm just like 2 minutes. And this is,
Do you want me to hold the mic, or I can hold the mic? Okay.
this was my mother. And this is Katja, child. This is my mother, and this is Katja as a child. She would always remember the awe, the swelling in her breastbone when she'd first seen her name written, Lydia guiding her hand across a slate. When she had learned to make her name, she began to put herself forward, traced KV in lemon polish on a chair back, threw frost on a window, icing on a cookie, KV, which meant me, I, which was her, a high-minded child, body small for her age, and so alive.
Is this still on? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sandra. That was a touching evening. I think this has been absolutely spectacular. We're so grateful to you for coming here and being so honest, and I think many of us will remember this evening. And now I welcome you to stay for a reception that we're having in Sandra's honor, and please chat to Sandra and amongst yourselves. And I'm tearing up from this evening. It was just so powerful. Thank you so much, Sandra.